The march of science has always been portrayed as a linear ascent from darkness into light, from ignorance to knowledge. We often assume that modernity has eclipsed the past, that today's technology and methodologies are inherently superior to the wisdom of prior civilizations. Yet history tells a more nuanced story. Across time, ancient societies achieved feats of engineering, medicine, astronomy, and environmental management that not only rivaled, but in some cases surpassed our current understanding. From the remarkable precision of the Egyptian pyramids to the complex urban planning of the Indus Valley, from Chinese traditional medicine to the sophisticated metallurgy of the Incas, the ancient world was brimming with insight, innovation, and ingenuity. What is often dismissed as primitive turns out to be astonishingly advanced when viewed through the lens of modern science. If we listen closely to the past, we may find answers not only to how people lived, but how we might live better, more sustainably, more harmoniously, and perhaps even more wisely. Welcome to History, Facts, and Mysteries. If you're fascinated by the secrets of ancient civilizations and how their legacy continues to shape the world around us, you're in the right place. Subscribe now to join our community of curious minds as we travel across time, peeling back layers of history to uncover not only what happened, but why it still matters. Every story reveals more than dates and facts. It gives us perspective, inspiration, and a deeper understanding of ourselves. Let's explore together. A 14,000-year-old human skull was recently discovered in Mexico. It's the oldest example of cranial deformation ever found. The skull belonged to a baby who was carefully wrapped in cloth, buried under the floor of a building. The infant's head had been deliberately reshaped by the ancient culture using a technique known as cranial deformation. This practice involved binding a baby's head to alter its shape. The sides of the skull were compressed, causing it to flatten and elongate, creating what we would call today a distinctive look. The practice of cranial deformation has been around for a very long time. According to National Geographic, it was practiced independently by several cultures all over the world, including in South America, Europe, and Africa. But why did they do it? And is there anything modern science that can learn from this old technique? Hello, and welcome to Life Noggin. Today we're answering the question, what can modern science learn from the ancient technique of cranial deformation? When you think of ancient cultures, what comes to mind? Maybe you think of the ancient Egyptians, with their massive pyramids, or the ancient Greeks, with their philosophy and art. You might also think of how advanced these cultures were with their inventions, innovations, and achievements. It is easy to forget that many of the things we have today are because of the hard work and ingenuity of the people who lived thousands of years ago. One thing we can learn from them is a technique called cranial deformation. Cranial deformation is a process used by some ancient cultures to change the shape of a person's skull. They would wrap up a baby's head tightly in cloth or use a board to mold the skull into a certain shape. This practice was common in many different cultures throughout history, and each one had its own reasons for doing it. In some cases, cranial deformation was done for religious or spiritual reasons. For example, the ancient Inca people of South America believed that by changing the shape of their children's skulls, they could make them more attractive to the gods. They would elongate the skull by wrapping the baby's head in a special type of cloth that put pressure on the sides of the skull. Over time, the pressure would cause the skull to warp and elongate. The Inca believed that this made the person more likely to live a long and healthy life. They also believed that it made them more intelligent and powerful. Other cultures practiced cranial deformation for more practical reasons. The ancient Egyptians, for example, believed that by changing the shape of their babies' skulls, they could make them less likely to die young. They would elongate the skull by wrapping the baby's head in a special type of cloth that put pressure on the sides of the skull. Over time, the pressure would cause the skull to warp and elongate. The Egyptians believed that this made the baby less likely to die from a head injury. They also believed that it made the baby less likely to get headaches and other problems. No matter what the reason, cranial deformation was a painful and dangerous practice. If it wasn't done properly, it could cause permanent damage to the baby's brain. But despite the risks, it was done for centuries. So what can modern science learn from this old technique? Well, for one, it can learn that changing the shape of the skull can have serious effects on the brain. Scientists are still trying to understand exactly how cranial deformation affects the brain, but they believe that it can cause problems with memory, attention, and other important functions. In addition, cranial deformation can also cause physical problems like headaches and dizziness. This is because, when the shape of the skull is changed, it can put pressure on the brain and spinal cord. This can damage the nerves and lead to all sorts of physical and psychological problems. But perhaps the most important thing that modern science can learn from this old technique is that our brains are incredibly adaptable. No matter what shape our skulls are, our brains will always find a way to adapt and overcome. Today, doctors sometimes need to change the shape of a baby's skull for medical reasons. For example, if a baby is born with a condition called hydrocephalus, they may need to have part of their skull removed. This allows the brain to grow and develop normally. Doctors can then replace the skull later in the baby's life. But in order to do this, they need to understand how cranial deformation works. By studying the skulls of ancient people who practiced cranial deformation, doctors can learn how to change the shape of a baby's skull safely and effectively. There are also some promising research on using cranial deformation to treat other medical conditions. For example, some doctors are investigating whether it can be used to treat children with epilepsy. Epilepsy is a condition that causes seizures. Seizures happen when there is abnormal electrical activity in the brain. This can cause all sorts of symptoms, including convulsions, jerky movements, and loss of consciousness. Doctors believe that by changing the shape of a child's skull, they may be able to reduce the severity of their seizures. They think that this may work by putting pressure on the parts of the brain that are responsible for seizures. This can help to stop the abnormal electrical activity that causes them. Of course, this is just speculation, and more research needs to be done. But it's an exciting possibility nonetheless. Now we know that ancient cultures weren't stupid. I mean, they created some pretty impressive stuff, like the pyramids and Stonehenge. So it's not surprising that they came up with techniques that modern science can learn from. Who knows what other secrets they may have uncovered about the human body and mind. With more research, we may be able to learn even more about how to treat medical conditions and improve our quality of life. Maybe we should take a few more cues from our ancestors. We might be surprised at what we can accomplish. As we continue to explore the human body and mind, we'll undoubtedly come across many more mysteries. That's why it's so important to keep learning and stay curious. The more we know about the world around us, the better equipped we'll be to solve the problems that face us. If you want to learn more about the human body and mind, there are plenty of resources available. Books, documentaries, and articles can all teach us new and interesting things about ourselves. We can also learn from each other by sharing our experiences and perspectives. The most important thing is to never stop asking questions. In every field of science, astronomy, medicine, engineering, environmental studies, and more, we find echoes of ancient voices, not as primitive precursors but as profound guides. These were not merely early attempts at knowledge. They were sophisticated systems, built on centuries of observation, community practice, and a deeply integrated worldview. Ancient science was not fragmented, but whole. It embraced the material and the spiritual, the empirical and the philosophical. In many ways, it was more human than the modern science we practice today. As we face a future filled with unprecedented challenges, climate change, technological disruption, global pandemics, and resource depletion, the search for solutions should not be limited to innovation alone. Sometimes, the best path forward is to look back, to examine the earth-built terraces of the Andes, the silent oracles of the stars, the time-worn cures of herbal knowledge, and the monumental feats of stone and steel that defy the ages. These are not just relics. They are resources, an ancient toolkit for a modern world. By merging modern methods with ancient wisdom, science does not regress, it evolves. There's so much we do want to know about the world that there's always something new to discover. So keep your mind open and be curious about everything. You never know what you might learn. For now, though, I think it's time to wrap things up. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something new and interesting. If you did, please hit the like button and share this video with your friends.